We search for certainty in an uncertain world. You know, life is anything but certainty, and we all want certainty. So to be able to hold both is a function of the heart, being open enough to do that.
Hey everyone, I'm Sonja and this is Wholeness Connection. And today I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Don St. John, and let me tell you a little more about him. Don St. John, PhD, is a somatic relational psychotherapist, workshop leader, and author of the award-winning book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood. And his latest book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, An Adventure of a Lifetime. He's an authorized continuum teacher and Hellerwork structural integration practitioner and trainer. He's taught and given presentations in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Brazil. And he's traveled the territory he describes and has accomplished an arguably miraculous level of personal change in one lifetime. As a psychotherapist, he works in a style that requires deep empathy and attunement with his patients. It's a level of emotional presence that he could not even have understood or imagined when he began his healing journey. As a continuum teacher, he teaches fluid movement. Again, this would have been unimaginable to him 3 decades ago. He walks what he talks. Dr. St. John has been immersed in both the psychotherapeutic and somatic therapy worlds for the past 55 years. His roots were in traditional clinical psychology, but early on, he realized from his own experience that the body must be included, and thus began his journey in both the psychotherapeutic and somatic realms. Welcome, Dr. St. John. And I would love it if you would. Yeah, and I would love it if you would hold up a copy. I only have the electronic version. If you'd hold up a copy of your most recent book so we can see that cover. Yes. It's quite a tour de force in all that it integrates. It's a wonderful read, so I definitely recommend it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To start, yeah, you're welcome. So to start with, there's all these connection points as I read your book that I'm really interested in digging into. Between my own offerings and what you discuss in the book. And so to start with, I call the channel Wholeness Connection with the WH. And, that's really around, on my spiritual journey, it was the psychological wasn't really separate from the physical, wasn't separate from the spiritual. Some pieces, along the way feel more, more like focused on one of those aspects or another, but they weren't really separate. And that was something I came to learn pretty early on, though it integrates more and more. And so I would love to hear, because you have a similar way of describing how those different aspects of ourselves and our lives are intertwined, and you can't really leave any of them out. And so I was I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think first, Sonja, you're fortunate to have discovered that because, the culture, the world, academia hasn't yet made that leap. And for example, when I was in graduate school back in the late 60s, the body was never even mentioned, looked at. Spirituality was something that some people did on Sunday morning. They just didn't make the bridges. They didn't link these vital aspects of a human being. And, my background, my childhood was quite traumatic. It was in towards the extreme range, and it didn't take me long after several years of psychotherapy to realize that talk therapy was not going to be anywhere near enough to help me heal what was needing healing. I had to involve my body. And, at a certain point, spirituality opened up for me in a very unusual experience. And I realized then that too had to be embraced to feel whole. And I think I think healing is not simply symptom relief. And that's a big, big contention of mine because all too often it's, put a band aid on it, fix that broken bone, send them on their way. When in fact, from my perspective, and as someone who not only has gone through it, but continues, because I see healing as becoming whole. And I'll
Yeah.
pause for a moment. And
Yeah. Yeah. There was so much there in what you said. Um, yeah. Well, this is hard to probably put words around, but say more about the becoming whole. Like, what does that include? Of course, once we start to list things, we're not completely integrating everything, right? It's like you could easily leave something out. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about that.
well, I'm sure I would leave something out. I will leave something out because it's a huge topic. But we can take the body and say, okay, we have feet and legs. What do? They connect us to the earth, and they're involved in our mobility, our moving. So we need to be here on the earth. And what does that involve? It involves developing a sense of autonomy. I'm the one who makes my choices, a sense of relational a relational sense. I'm not alone in this world. I'm here with you, okay? And a place in the world. This is what I do in the world. I drive a bus. I love it. I get to meet new people every day. I'm a rocket scientist, whatever it may be,
Mm.
ideally it's fulfilling. Okay. Then there's the heart. And for me that's a transition place. First of all, we don't understand the heart. For the longest time we considered it to be a mechanical pump that simply, receives blood without oxygen, sends it to the lungs to oxygenate back to the heart and off to the body. And that was the heart. But we're beginning to realize that the heart is part of the brain. It's a source of wisdom and understanding. The heart can grasp things that the mind cannot. And that's
Yeah.
so important. We search for certainty in an uncertain world. You know, life is anything but certainty, and we all want certainty. So to be able to hold both is a function of the heart, being open enough to do that.
I was just going to say really quickly, the Heart Mouth Institute is definitely a good resource if anyone's interested more in the heart. Just wanted to insert that really
Absolutely.
quickly.
I was going to say that as
Yeah.
well. The Heart Math
Yeah.
Institute is a great resource to get a very different perspective on the human heart. And I think that understanding has the power to make profound changes in our culture. Now, it's hard to argue that our culture is not simply misguided in pursuit of things, in pursuit of more and more and more wealth, accumulation of toys. Okay? And we stop there. We don't realize and we don't privilege what it's really about, and that's relationship. Okay? Relationship to
Yes.
ourselves, to each other, to the divine. It's all about relationship.
Yeah, and that connects to my deep calling deep. That's what I call when I talk about deep connection. I call it deep calling deep, those episodes. And yeah, that's sort of the trio that I talk about is connection to self and connection to something bigger than oneself, whatever you call that, and connection to each other. um, and that they're all interrelated also, and flowing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
They feed each other.
Mhm.
To the degree that I'm connected to myself as a body, you know, and then that's a whole. We could spend 2 hours talking about what that means. It doesn't mean, I can exercise and move like that. The body's a mystery.
Mm.
And there's a depth of possibility in being able to connect with oneself merely at that level. If you think about it, the body is primarily fluid, like
Mhm.
70% more or less fluid. And if you want to go to another level, it's like 99.7% space.
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
perspective of physics, it's mostly space. What are the implications of that fact? That's
Yeah.
rarely ever considered, except in certain little enclaves of understanding and practice. But one of the implications is, I'm 80 years old, and and I have some serious health issues like arthritis, for example, from both my mother and my grandmother. And yet I teach fluid movement workshops. I get on the
Yeah.
floor and I teach 40-year-olds how to move fluidly, okay? And how to
Yeah.
live with a sense of spaciousness. So fluidity,
Yeah.
spaciousness, imagine that. And one of the things that
Beautiful.
occurs with that connection is that life nourishes us simply by being. And the more
Yeah.
I'm nourished in that way, the less needy, you know, dependent I have to be on someone else. And the freer I feel, the more fully I can connect with someone else.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I want to hear just a little bit more about that. I'm sure it's um actually experiencing it would be the best. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about how that works for the people you work with. Like how is that process? So the link between the fluid movement and um I, how this is to their way of being. Their spaciousness, you said, and also the sense of the underlying support, wellness, abundance.
Where we are as human beings, this understanding that I'm communicating here has, yet to reach the level of the culture. Most of us, and I was among the worst by far. I could not feel my body below my neck.
Mm.
It was frozen. The trauma, the beatings, the almost dying at birth, the put downs every day for 15 years, emotional put downs, physical beatings, that whole thing. So, no capacity. The first time that I felt a connection with another human being, it almost floored me. It was like, you know, if you'd never tasted sugar in your life and you had nothing but bitter and salty, and someone gives you sweet candy and you're tasting it and wondering, what is this? I don't know it. I never had it before, but it feels so good. And that was like a beginning moment. And you see, when the body is dense and tense, we're holding, we're holding. It's below conscious awareness, but those muscles and connective tissue are all holding, creating a more isolated, separate sense of self. Okay, the more I can open, the more I can become fluid. Okay, the more resonant I become. Is that
Yeah,
clear so far?
that's really helpful. That's so helpful. And it reminds me just of other experiences I've had in general where there's sort of that internal bracing. And I haven't even always thought of it in terms of the body, to be honest, but I think it's all connected. Like I said, it's not really separate. Um, and how that internal like unbracing like that is so much a part of connection and all, in all those ways that I talked about to
Mm-hmm.
oneself, to others, and to something bigger than ourselves. So
And
it resonates with me on that level of my own experience, and I think it's also really helps to make that connection just logically. Like that makes sense to me. Like your actual tissues are tense and holding, like you said.
yeah, yeah, and it's an ongoing process. Again, I'm 80 years old, and I think my capacity is continuing to grow to be able to sit with someone and just feel love.
Yeah,
Because
I'm
at the
curious. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
because I think at the deepest level, love is at our essence.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
been often said we don't have to go looking for love, it's where we come from. We have to
yeah,
get everything else out of the way, all the false beliefs, all the holdings, the constricting, the effects of so many wounds, both familial and cultural and accidental and genetic. And, the more we
yeah,
can uncover the depths of our being, the more we find we can just sit opposite someone and feel love like they were
yeah.
our
Mhm.
lover. Even though,
Mhm.
the relationship is completely different. It could be the cashier at the bank, and just take that moment and just be there because that's who we are.
Yeah, that's definitely that deep connection that I'm always trying to explain as well. Um, I want to talk about that a bit more. Before I do, just a really quick follow up, and I think I already know the answer, because you had this a lot of, very post traumatic stress kind of healing to do, that kind of a healing journey. But would you
Yeah,
say that everyone is on a healing journey? Yes. Would
I
you
think
say, or?
everyone, I think, yes, the answer is yes. I think it would be great if everyone became aware that that's what they're here to do, and that
Yeah.
becoming whole, becoming strong. How many people feel strong in the world? Like, they could stand up to anyone and speak their truth. How many people feel like they can open their hearts and receive? It's one of the most challenging things for human beings, to be looked at right in the eyes and have sweet words spoken to them. People get squirrely. It's really interesting. To be able to embrace all of that dynamic range of possibilities with love at the center. And then hopefully, I'm not there yet, but hopefully a constant connection to whatever we call the divine, the universe, God, higher power. Okay. I think that's a possibility too that I haven't yet arrived at.
Yeah. So talking about, you've spoken so eloquently about it already, and this center being love is one thing you mentioned. Any other words you'd want to put around deep connection and what that is, either conceptually or, another moment where you've felt into it? Because a lot of it sort of is that felt sense, so it's hard to put into words.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a felt sense. Some words would be soul nourishing, deeply nourishing. It involves removing our outer garments of our personality, the selves or parts of self that we present to the world, the Jungian persona, who some people don't realize that they go much deeper than the character that they walk around with day in and day out.
Yeah.
It's being willing to do that, to really let someone else know you and be willing to know someone else, to quiet the mind, to listen with the whole body. Some words that I'm attempting to
Yeah.
answer your question with, Sonja.
Yeah. No, and it's reminding me what you said earlier too. It's amazingly one of the most difficult things, and kind of ultimately maybe where the journey is going. There's this longing, I think, from everyone to be seen deeply, yet it's so difficult, like you were saying earlier, to
Yeah,
actually be seen. Yeah.
that's it. That's it. And I think, that goes to the heart of so many problems. This longing to be seen deeply and this challenge to allowing anyone to see us deeply. I think it's at the root of addictions, for example. That longing, it feels so good. It's so nourishing. It's an essential nutrient. If we go without vitamin C uh, in our diet for a length of time, we're going to become ill. And going without that level of connection and nourishment, our soul is going to become ill,
Yeah.
because we need it and we crave it.
Yeah. This is segueing right into my next question, actually, because, um, well, just as you're speaking, I'm feeling that sense of like that oneness, right? The bigger connection to the all, to everyone else. And a lot of people on the spiritual journey have like sort of glimpses of that or feeling states of that. Yet, even when we're talking about being seen deeply, there's this personal aspect and dimension to that. And so, like in your book, let's see, what was the term you used? You said you spoke of individual freedom and global cohesion, which
Mm.
reminded me of, I often talk about oneness and diversity, and diversity and oneness, which I think is a similar idea. But the way you laid it out in the book, I was wondering if you could talk about that a little here, because I thought that was really, it was like gave me a new sort of handle on it, a new sort of approach and like way that I could integrate it, and yeah, just sort of integrate it into my journey as well.
Yeah, that came to me when I was reading a book by a biochemist named Mei-Wan Ho. And she talked about water as being coherent. And she defined coherent that way as global cohesion and individual autonomy, and used the image of a jazz band to convey the concept. So each musician is doing his or her own thing, and yet they're doing it cohesively together. And when I read that, I thought, my God, that's it. If you look at the structure of the human body, you know, anatomically speaking, that concept should be our model. Every single joint free to do what that joint does. All the movements, that joint does, ideally, they're free to do in cohesion with the whole. And that's like coordination, gracefulness, right? And then I thought, that's true all the way. Our psyche, It's not as easy to see in our psyche. That would take a little more depth to clarify. But in our relationships, like, once again, it becomes easy to see, to feel completely free and completely connected to your partner. It was like, of course, if it's and it's dynamic. It's not a state that we reach and say, okay, I've arrived, and we're going to move along like this for the next 30 years because we're optimally free and optimally together, connected. No, it's dynamic. And if it moves too far in the direction of individual freedom, it feels like we're losing connection. If it moves the other way too far, it's like we're getting glued here. And unfortunately, many, many, many people live in one side or the other side. Either it's like, stuck at the hips, so to speak, or living parallel lives where they don't really come together. So that model provided a beautiful, and you're probably familiar with Dan Siegel, who's written
Yes. Mm-hmm. Me,
beautiful
we.
books
Yeah.
on the
Mm-hmm.
mind. And he's he's a genius, and he uses the term integration, but he defines it the same way that Mei-Wan Ho defined coherence. Once again, differentiation or autonomy and connection or linkage. Okay? And
Yeah.
so at every level, from the cells to our relationships, family, okay, that model fits. And it's a good one to keep in mind. Are we connected? Or do we feel autonomous?
Yeah. Beautiful that you also mentioned that it's a dance and a process, though, because that is,
Yeah.
I think,
Oh,
important for people to
absolutely.
realize. It's
Absolutely.
essential. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
not a static
Definitely.
model. We're changing every day.
So, kind of not in the exact sense we were just talking about freedom, where we were talking about, freedom versus connectedness, but more in the sense we were talking about earlier with the healing journey, that like getting more open and dropping layers of barriers within us and things like that. That sense of freedom. I'm curious if you, um, because the spiritual journey, in those ways really is so much about freedom. If you had a piece of wisdom to share with our audience about that journey to freedom that we each have, what would it be?
Well, I think the first piece that I would share, Sonja, is embark on the journey. Embark on the journey. We're all wounded to one degree or another, and it isn't anyone's fault. It's life at this moment as we know it. So we're all in it together. Embark on the journey. Recognize that you're more than just a body, more than just a personality, more than just your relationships, more than just your spiritual beliefs or practices. You're all of it. You're all of it. And at the very, very center is love. And there are many, many resources and supports in the world today than there were, when I was a youngster. Most of these things did not exist. I can mention, for example, continuum, which is a form of fluid movement and meditation that has helped me enormously in becoming more fluid. And to go back to your earlier question, Sonja, as I become more free in myself, I become more relatable to you. Right?
Yeah.
You see how that
Mm-hmm.
is circular, and I become more relatable to you. It's so nourishing. I feel freer. Okay? So
Yes.
that's what I would suggest. And my book is a good resource because it mentions many of the things that supported me in going from this character with pretty severe complex PTSD. uh I went through marriages like some people go through shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think that, because it can feel difficult, if you're really going there, obviously it does, really feeling your feelings and doing the whole journey. I think to hear that, both to know that, everyone's on it together, and also to have that deeper awareness that it is the unfoldment. In that sense, it's right. It's because it's the unfoldment and it's the journey. I think that is really helpful for people to hopefully do it and embark. So embark, everybody. um, and then if you have any other final words you'd like to say, please go ahead. But I would also just love if you could share with our audience, any offerings you have, where they could find you or connect with you, anything about that.
Yeah, you can find me on our website, which is www.pathsofconnection.com. And I'll spell that PATHSONNECTION, pathsofconnection.com. John St. John. And, again, I'm 80, I'm semi retired, so I'm not teaching that much. We're teaching continuum workshops in Salt Lake City. Um, Read my book, and there's so much available in the world to make your life richer, unimaginably so. Because if it could occur with me, pretty much can occur for anyone.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights and your own journey with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Sonja.